Welcome to Fueled by Impact, a show for progressive leaders and creators. Now, my guest today is a former CEO of a billion-dollar company who works by day as a corporate executive and by morning, evening, weekend as a father, a life coach, an adventurer, and as the host of the 28 Summers podcast, a show that is all about living adventurously. He got his start as a personal trainer and rose to be CEO of a large company. His story is rare, his message is authentic and inspiring, and his ideas are powerful but completely accessible no matter who you are. So please join me in welcoming the one, the only, Jay Worthy. Well, Jay, welcome. Thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really excited to be here, although a little nervous being on this side of the microphone.
Oh, you got nothing to be worried about. Well, I do appreciate your time. Let's dive right in. I would love just to have you, can you bring us up to speed on what you are doing these days?
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? It's kind of a funny one because I think one of the things that we typically default to in society, I think, is we ask people like what they do for a living. It's such a strange question for me today because my life is filled with lots of different things. Like if you'd have asked me that question 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm CEO of a billion-dollar company, right? It's a pretty succinct answer. But even then, that wouldn't really have, I think, neatly defined what I do and what I did. And so I like to think about my life as a collection of things that I do that bring me joy. Some of them I get paid for, most of them I don't. But that's okay. And so it's something you and I have pondered over the years, this idea of a slash career, if you like, things that I fill my time with that I just find deep enjoyment with. So, at a primary level, I'm a husband and a father, and that's, one of the proudest aspects of my life. I've got a beautiful wife, Georgina. We've got 4 incredible kids. And that's, probably, not probably, that's the most proud thing in my life. Outside of that, I'm still an executive. So my day job is I work in a multi-billion-dollar company as an executive, but I have a lot of other things that I am really focused on. And I kind of identify, if you like, as, a podcast host, as a life coach, which I recently certified as, an adventurer. So that I'm kind of all of these things together. And that's really what I fill my time doing. Of course, I have a day job that really spend the majority of my time doing. But I also have a lot of other things that I wrap around it that bring me a huge amount of joy.
So why don't we, I want to first spend a little time just talking about the 28 Summers and the more of the adventure side of things. And maybe you could just introduce us a little bit to what is that all about and what in particular is your mission?
Yeah, for sure. And I, first of all, just huge privilege to be here. Really excited to talk about this because it really means a lot to me. And so the notion of 28 Summers goes back to an interview that I heard with a guy called Jesse Itzler, who's an author, a serial entrepreneur, very successful guy. And he was being interviewed by a guy called Tom Bilyeu. And he just turned 50, and Tom was asking him, hey, where do you get your passion, your energy, your verve for life from? And why are you so fixated on living every single second? And Jesse's answer was, well, I just turned 50 and the average life expectancy for a male in the US is 78. So I don't have 28 years left. I potentially only got 28 summers left, right? And so that in that moment, I remember distinctly where I was. I was living in Chicago. I was in my basement. I was doing some morning mobility, listening to a podcast, and I was just like, oh my God, that is it. That's what I've been grappling with all these years, is this notion of an atomic clock that's ticking down. And that reframe of don't think about it as years, think about it as summers was really powerful for me. And it started this journey that really took me through some of the highest points and the lowest points of my life over the subsequent kind of couple of years, which I'm sure we'll get into. But when I moved back to the UK, I decided that I had to launch this podcast, 28 Summers, and share some of my own story, but more importantly, the story of others, of people who are doing amazing things. And one of the things that's really important to me is sharing the full spectrum. So there's the Mark Beaumonts of this world, who I interviewed on my podcast, who currently holds the world record for the fastest circumnavigation of the globe by bicycle. And he did that in 76 days, beating the previous record by more than 60 days. It's remarkable when you think about what he had to have done to accomplish that. And in the same breath, I interview people like me, people who are just normal people who decide to do stuff that's a bit different, a bit out there, and push their limits. And I love that contrast, because I think we often hear the amazing Hollywood style stories. We don't often hear the everyday stories, the, John or Joan or whoever who work in accounts who happen to just go and hike the Pacific Crest Trail last year, right? They're the stories that I think are really powerful, because they show people what is possible and the power of adventure. And so, that notion of mission for me is on a couple of levels, really. There's I have a personal mission, and then I have kind of a community mission, if you like, if that makes sense. So the community mission for me with 28 Summers is about creating a safe space. I'm kind of jaded by all the negative press and media out there, and I think social media can get a little bit heavy at times. And so what I'm trying to build with 28 Summers is a really safe community where we encourage each other. So if you said to me in the 28 Summers community, hey, I've decided I want to run a 100-mile race. I and the people in the 28 Summers community would be saying to you, Mike, that's amazing. Which race are you doing? When are you going to do it? Have you thought about fuel strategy? What can we do to help? Whereas typically what happens is when you go out there to society and say, I'm going to run a 100-mile race, people project their fears onto you, and they tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't do that. Well, are you sure that's a good idea? Have you ever run that far before? Is it safe? What if you get injured? They start sharing all of their fears. So the community mission for me with 28 Summers is all about creating a safe space for us all to dream a little and not be intimidated or put off before our dream even gets into motion. And then on a personal level, I feel like I'm a work in progress. So I feel like one of the things that I'm really focused on at the moment is trying to be as present as possible. So when I'm talking to you, I'm just talking to you. I'm not thinking about what I've got to do after this. I'm not thinking about what I've got to do tomorrow. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm present, I'm connected and talking to you. And I know that we hear that a lot, but it's actually really hard to do. And one of my favorite rugby players, Johnny Wilkinson, right, he was interviewed recently on a podcast, and he used a phrase which, a bit like 28, the Jesse Itzler 28 Summers thing, really stuck in my brain. And he said he's focused on all of me in every moment. That for him is high performance. And I think that's really powerful. If you can just say, if I can just be in the moment, present and focused on whatever I'm doing, whether that is a podcast with Mike Kavanagh today, or, I'm in my master's class tonight, or I'm putting my son to bed and reading him a bedtime story, or I'm doing the washing up, all of me in every moment. And that Johnny Wilkinson expression for me just sums it up perfectly. So that's what I'm working on.
That's amazing. I love that. First of all, your guests are amazing, both the everyday people as well as the incredible stories that you have some guests on there. I find it incredibly inspiring. I'm curious, as the host of a show like that, you're hearing all of these amazing stories. What kind of fuel does that give you? And maybe what has been maybe a recent inspiration that's come out of your interaction and engagement with this community that you're building?
Yeah, it's like your own personal kind of gas station where I can go anytime and I can get refueled. And it is the most, genuinely, outside of kind of getting married and becoming a dad, it's the most energizing experience of my life, hosting this podcast and launching this podcast. I get to talk to these incredible people, and I'm just pumped after I get off. I just feel like I can tackle the world, because their stories are so powerful, either because they play the role of pace setter. They're really setting an aggressive pace, like Mark or Jordan Wiley or Kath Wallace, or they're a bit more like Max Woozy, who's the 11-year-old boy that I interviewed, who slept in his garden for a whole year because his neighbor gave him a tent when he was terminally ill, saying, I'll only give you this tent if you have an adventure in it. I mean, quite apart from the fact that the whole story, when you listen to it, will make you emotional because it's so stunningly beautiful. But it's also an 11-year-old boy teaching us how to live, right? And I love that. I love that I'm 43 years old. I've got this gnarly white beard. I'm covered in tattoos. I think I know the stuff, and I got an 11-year-old kid teaching me life is just about being present. Pushing your limits, getting out your comfort zone, and challenging yourself. And I think so that for me, it's been incredibly energizing. That's a couple of the stories that I've shared on the podcast that have been really powerful. And actually, one of the things, because of Max, one of the things that I'm doing now and launching in about 2 weeks is what I'm calling my Everyday Adventurer series. So alongside the normal 28 Summers guests, I've gone out to the community and I've asked for, Joe and Jane average, like just normal people that have normal jobs, have gone through, certain things in their life and have decided to do something. And I'm so excited to launch that because I asked for 2 people and I ended up getting like 50 people respond. So it's taken a while to work through it. But when I launch that, I think people will really find it valuable because it kind of shines a mirror up to all of us. Like it shows us that there are no barriers. All the barriers are self-imposed, right? You can get out there and be adventurous if you really want it enough.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when do you expect that to launch?
Yeah, that'll launch. So the first recordings are happening in about 10 days and I'll check in. So some of them have got events that are happening in October, November. Some have got events happening in the summer. I've got others that have got big events happening next year. So there'll just be these kind of sporadic check-ins. My regular podcast is a steady drumbeat. Every Friday, I put something out to the world. But with these, it's a bit more sporadic, and we'll really dig in a bit more. Leverage a little bit more the life coaching aspect of it, right? Well, we talk a little bit more about the challenges. So, in this example, Mike, you've decided to sign up. I've really signed you up for 100 miler, by the way. So you're doing, yeah, I know. You're doing your 100 miler, like, okay, well, you've made the commitment. Now what? Well, I need a game plan. How's the game plan going? How am I fitting that around work? I've still got to, be a dad and be a husband. How am I, fitting all this in? And it's not going to be a perfectly plain ride. So that series is really going to get into some of the mechanics of not just signing up, but the whole journey to get to the event.
That'll be really helpful for people because that is a huge part of people actually getting into it. Is they know there's a lot involved and they don't even know where to start. But I think the idea of other regular people who are diving in, taking that plunge, and you're hearing what they're going through, that makes it feel more attainable. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I look forward to that.
One of the dangers, of course, of having this podcast and speaking to people like this is you continually sign up for more and more crazy challenges because it is addictive. It is, to your question before, it's it's like this elixir. Like you when you do these events, I genuinely believe they're transformational. I know transformational is a word that's bandied around a lot, but they really are. You learn so much about yourself when you put yourself through adversity and you challenge yourself. And then when you hear these stories, you feel really compelled to try things. So you end up starting to push your own boundaries a lot. But that's a nice problem to have.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so you've been on quite the journey yourself, and let's dial it back to a younger you and take me on the journey. And in particular, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about offline, and it's something that I really wanted to bring into this conversation, is around the notion of leadership. And I think a big area of my own personal focus these days is trying to cultivate more people's embracing their role as a leader, whether or not they're actually in a leadership role where they're in charge of other people at work, or they're just situationally, or they're community organizing. There's all kinds of opportunities to lead. And you have quite the background in terms of leadership. And so perhaps we could just start all the way back, take me as far back as it makes sense to go. And let's just do a little bit of bring me along for the journey that was your career that brought you to this moment.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And maybe even before I dive back, the one comment that I would make on this kind of notion of leadership, I think that for me, like, everybody's a leader. Because I think the definition at its basal level for me of leadership is the ability to influence others, and whether we want to or not, we all have an ability to influence others. So, if I'm rude to you or aggressive with you or combative, that's going to elicit a reaction from you, depending on how in control of your emotions you are. So, I think we're all leaders, and I think that being a dad to 4 kids, I don't necessarily believe, and my kids have been educated in both the US and the UK, that we necessarily prepare our kids for that reality. I think we create leadership as this beacon of greatness. There are certain people in our community that we perceive as leaders, and everybody else is a follower. But that's not really, in my mind, how human nature works. We're all leaders because we all have the ability to influence each other. And I wish somebody could have told me that 25 years ago, because I think it would have been really powerful wisdom to have. So my story, well, I guess probably the best place to go back to is, around 1999, I finished my bachelor's degree in sports science, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do in life. I ended up with an accidental career that actually worked out okay for me, but I didn't really have a strong point of view on what I wanted to be when I grew up, So what inevitably happened was, I didn't want to move back with my parents. Love my parents dearly, but I at that point I'd lived away at university for 3 years, so I didn't want to go home. I came from quite a rural part of the UK, and I just didn't want to go back there. I wanted to keep moving forward, and so I ended up moving into a flat with some friends in London that I couldn't really afford to live in. I didn't have enough money, and it was a pretty nasty flat, but great friends. And I didn't really have any ability to earn any money. So I got a job selling mobile phones, which was commission only. Turns out I wasn't very good at selling mobile phones. And I'd always been pretty passionate about sport and exercise. I played kind of rugby and other sports at college and school. So I went to the local gym, and I offered my services free of charge as a fitness instructor to walk the floor if they gave me a free gym membership. And they kindly obliged. And I typically spent most of my time in the gym because I didn't want to be in the grotty flat. And it just, the doors just opened for me. And we'll come back to this, I'm sure, later on in the discussion. But I believe very, very strongly in the power of tribe. Like when you surround yourself with people that think positively and think in the same way as you, then good things can happen. And that happened for me. I was very positive. It was all about fitness. Really just wanted to be around the gym, and before long I got offered a job there as a fitness instructor. Pretty low salary, but I felt like I'd won $1 million, and it just started to go from there. And the succinct version, Mike, honestly, is 20 years later I woke up and I was CEO of $1 billion company, right? Which is kind of funny to say, and of course it did. There were a lot of successes and failures and wrong turns and backtracks, and there's lots to unpack there. But ultimately, I went on this journey in a global fitness industry, and I had a great time. And I ended up with the opportunity of leading a $1 billion company, as you know, which was probably equal parts one of the biggest privileges of my life and one of the hardest challenges I've ever faced. It was really tough, and we might want to get into that as well. But for me, the journey was almost accidental, but nonetheless it was really formative.
So were there any points along that journey where, I say, key pivotal moments, any breaks that happened, chances that people took on you?
I think one of the things that whenever people ask me that question, I always say, I made a lot of missteps. I didn't necessarily always make the right decisions, but I always trusted my gut. And I do think that that's quite an important thing to share with kind of younger people coming through in their career. I don't really think there are bad decisions, right? That ultimately you make a decision, you stand by it, and you'll learn from it one way or the other. So I made some missteps, and I definitely got some breaks. But the breaks for me, I genuinely believe, came because of the way that I conducted myself. And I think that's a really important. I tell my kids this, like, always conduct yourself in the right way. I heard Will Smith talking about this on a podcast with Jay Shetty recently. It's I can't remember the exact expression that he used, but it's something like it's nice to, I know what it is. It's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. And I think that that is a really powerful lesson for anybody coming through in their career. It's something that I share with my children, is always treat other people the way that you would want to be treated. And in any role in my career, I've always tried to be a good guy. That doesn't always mean you can't make tough decisions, because sometimes you have to, right? But always trying to treat people fairly, and be gracious with people and be kind to people and supportive and compassionate where you can. But I do think that you make your own luck in this world. And so, I think the way I conducted myself meant that people wanted to help me on those times when I got made redundant or things didn't work out with my own businesses or whatever. So yeah, I did catch some breaks, but I think that I primed the way for those breaks in a way, with the way that I conducted myself.
It reminds me a little bit of that. I actually don't even know where it comes from, but the notion that the three things that you need to focus on are availability, affability, and ability, in that order. So it doesn't matter if you're not there, if you don't show up, that's first and foremost. But then the affability factor that you're mentioning, is there anything else that you would recommend to other people beyond just the way that they conduct themselves to either position themselves to, say, be noticed? It's one of the things I commonly hear, particularly around people who are rising or have an aspiration to rise, which is, how do I get noticed?
For sure. And I always think there's two ways to answer that question. So there's the tactical answers. So some of the things that I would always recommend people to do is, imagine if there's a job that you really aspire to, imagine that you were being interviewed for it tomorrow. What are all the reasons you wouldn't get that job? Like, why wouldn't they give you the job tomorrow? And then go and work on those things. It sounds so basic, but we don't necessarily do that because we don't necessarily like to confront our weaknesses. We tend to prefer to focus on our strengths. So that's one good thing. That's a tactical thing that people can do. The other is to project forward and say, where do I want to be in 5 or 10 years? And then list down all of the attributes you think you would need to have in order to be successful in that role. Not be given the role, but to be successful in that role. And then again, go and make it happen. And many times in my career, I made the less obvious choice, where I was presented with career progression opportunities, but I took a sideways step because it was difficult, because it would challenge me, because it meant that I was going to have to develop new skills. And I thought that would make me a more rounded leader, right? So there's some tactical ideas, which I do think actually work really, really well. The more 37,000 for strategic kind of philosophical questions, I think are often more powerful for up and coming leaders and people that are trying to get noticed, to use the word that you used, I think, is like, what is it you're trying to achieve, right? Because I spent 20 years getting faster and faster, climbing up that ladder, right? And once it was intoxicating. So once you start to get it, you get all of the trappings, right? They're called trappings for a reason. All the trappings is, you get more money, you get nice cars, you get, great holidays. And it's very easy to just fall into that kind of cadence of like, I just need to keep working for the next promotion. And before I knew it, I was right at the top of the ladder. And I distinctly remember the first time I joined the company that I ended up being CEO of, in around 2012, 2013, I sat down with the CEO in his corner office. And I went back to my wife, to the hotel. I called my wife back in the UK and I said, I'd love to have that office one day. And I spent the next 5 or 6 years doing everything possible to get to that corner office. And I got there. And I remember 24, 48 hours after getting there, I sat down and I was like, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So we have this view in our mind of what we think it is, this notion of grass is always greener, or, is it really what we think it is? So I think if I were giving myself advice 20 years ago, I'd probably just be saying, slow down, take a breath, just be really clear and purposeful on what you want. That doesn't mean that you can't still strive for that corner office, but think about the sacrifices you might have to make along the way, and then try to figure out, are those trade-offs worth it?
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to put ourselves into those positions. We have a set of assumptions about what it'll be like, and often we're wrong. Is there any way that you have found that it's been, at least since you've learned this lesson, that it's important to kind of put yourself to more honestly look at those things that you think you want and determine whether or not they actually are the thing that you're striving for?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And frankly, that's become a bit of an obsession for me. And that's foundationally, that's part of 28 Summers, but also part of how I think about my life coaching practice and the way that I talk to, other executives who are asking for support, is just this notion that um, I think one of the things that we can do as up and coming leaders is step back and get some perspective. And one of the ways that I think we can do that is through the outdoors and adventure. Um, because I think that we live in this always on world. So we can talk about getting perspective, but it's actually, I mean, you posted recently about this yourself. It's really hard to switch off. It's incredibly difficult to switch off. Always on world. We're talking about, high performers who are trying to get noticed and trying to get promoted. So they can't help themselves but lean in and answer that email because they want to be seen to be on point. And this notion of unplugging is very difficult to do. And I found over the years, and particularly recently, that getting out into the outdoors and really focusing on being present in a place is a really powerful opportunity and platform to get some perspective. And one of the things I like to say, is kind of funny, but is, get high, not as in, go smoke a joint, but get heights, like go up a mountain. It doesn't have to be Everest. It could be, 1,000-meter high mountain, which anybody, frankly, could probably just slowly walk up. There's a lot of good places you can go. Getting that perspective is so powerful. And if you live in an urban area, you're not near any outdoor areas, get up a high building, get some perspective, because I think everything just slows down. And if you allow yourself then, when you're in that moment, to then start to think about your life and about the things that are important to you, I think it will help you kind of triage some of the priorities that you have in your life. And it has done for me. Sometimes people would say, look, you're a father of four. What on earth are you doing disappearing out for 4 or 5 days on an adventure? And I would say, I come back a better dad, no question. Because on those 4 or 5 days when I'm out, I'm really thoughtful about how I want to spend my time with my kids when I get back to them. And I think the same is true of leadership. When we get out of our businesses, and we truly get out of our businesses and we connect with nature, and we have to get focused on lighting a fire, preparing food, filtering water, or whatever it is we're doing. We're not worried about the tactical stuff in the business. That's when I think we start to get perspective and start to think about what's important.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. And it's something that different famous leaders who have those types of rituals embedded into their life, whether or not it's adventure, there's some element of stepping back, getting away from things so that they can have that broader view. And it's something that is really hard for people to carve that time out to do. And yet it's so vital. I mean, in many ways, it's more important than almost anything else that you can do on the job. You said when you stepped into the role of CEO, it was the most challenging situation you've ever found yourself in. Can you unpack that for me a little bit? Talk to me about why that was. What about it was so uniquely challenging?
It was challenging. I don't know whether it was uniquely challenging. In fact, it probably wasn't. I often think that when leaders step into roles, is very rarely the perfect scenario. I mean, what is the perfect scenario? Like a middle of the road performer before you. He or she wasn't that great, but wasn't that bad. They kind of did an okay job, and you're probably going to win. But that doesn't often happen. I think normally, certainly in my career, I either stepped into leadership roles where my predecessor had really not performed, or something had gone wrong, and so I'd been sent in to do a bit of a cleanup job. Or the opposite was true. I'd stepped in and they were like the Messiah. They performed exceptionally well. They were, walking off into the sunset, crowned in glory. And you're like, how on earth do I follow that? Like, anything I do is going to be judged against that greatness. So, I think that's difficult, isn't it? Because you get into these roles and there's already baggage. And I think the reason I talked the way I did about that particular role, and I should be clear, eternally grateful for the opportunity, very thankful for the lessons that I learned in that. And I wouldn't change it. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, because I cared so deeply about the company and the people. And I wanted to do the role because I wanted to see if I could make a difference. But the reason I articulate it as the most challenging thing I think that I've ever done, is because it was a very intense situation. And in the interest of kind of not getting into personal details, what I would say is that my predecessor had left quite quickly, and I was put into place even more quickly, without a huge amount of preparation. I think when you dream of these big landmark, I liken it to, you dream of one day playing professional football, or you dream of one day, making it into a Hollywood movie. And you have these dreams, these affirmations that you've repeated to yourself all your life, that it's going to be amazing, that it's going to be the best moment of your life. It's going to be, fanfare and amazing. And it wasn't like that. It was raw and aggressive and sudden. And I found out at whatever it was, 2:00 in the afternoon, and I was in the office until midnight dealing with the fallout. And then the next 90 days I can barely remember, because it was a blur. And because you were there, and you were alongside me helping, and it was tremendously difficult, because it was so intense, because of the intensity of it, and the weight of expectation was, you need to fix some stuff, and you need to help us sell this company, because it's time for us to move on. So there was a lot of pressure, and frankly, I didn't necessarily feel prepared for it. And so you get these things, like you get imposter syndrome, right? So you get through that first 24, 48 hour period, and you sit down, okay, this is amazing. This is what I always wanted, but am I actually good enough to do this job? And at the same time, there's plenty of people quite unashamedly vocalizing their distaste at you being given the role. And I should say, again, there were dozens of people, hundreds of people who were incredibly supportive. But it's like in anything in life, you want to look at the 100 people that are really supportive, but you can't help, your ego won't let you avoid listening to the 1 or 2 people that are being very openly scathing and critical. So I did a lot of growing up, even at 41. I mean, I'd become a CEO of $1 billion company at 41, which I'm immensely proud of. But I still did a lot growing up in a very short space of time, because I had to learn what I was going to worry about, and the things that I could control and the things I couldn't, and what my values were, and how I was going to present myself as a CEO of that company.
And how did you actually cope with that immense amount of pressure? Just even tactically, what did you do to get through day to day, the first 90 days that were so intense? What were you doing outside of work? What were you doing during work? How did you get through it?
So in the run up, so this would have been 2018, I would say from somewhere around 2013, 14, I got onto this kind of drive where I was really trying to improve my health and my well-being. I'd worked in the fitness industry all my career, and I had the external impression. I gave people the external impression that I was healthy, but I wasn't really. I was a bit overweight. I wasn't particularly fit and healthy, and work was getting in the way. So around 2013, I'd really started to dial that in. We just had William, our third child, and I just decided at that point, I've got to really focus on my health. So I've been doing that for a while. When I took the CEO job, everything went out the window. It was like all the things that I valued and believed in terms of my health and my mental well-being disappeared. And I just went into survival mode. And those first 30 days are genuinely a blur. And I got into a really bad place mentally. And that actually followed me later on, came back to me later on, but maybe we'll get to that, maybe we won't. But in those 30 days, I got into a pretty dark place. My wife was incredibly supportive. I had a few very close friends around me who were really supportive as well. But outside of that, I was incredibly isolated, and I let that get to me. And so in an epiphany, I honestly can't, I'd love to give you the kind of the perfect, Hollywood story of how I realized that I needed to make, I don't really know. But at some point in those 30 days, I had a wake up call, some one way or another. And I decided that I had to get control of the things that I could control. And there was a ton of stuff happening in my work life that I couldn't control, and was pretty stressful. But the one thing I could control was when I get up in the morning and when I first look at my phone. And those two things were so powerful for me, because it just, I got some perspective again. And I said, I'm going to wake up And and I don't do this now, by the way, but I started getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is a bit crazy, and it wasn't good for my long-term health. But at the time, it was the way that I got into a place where I could be comfortable with the stresses. And I said, from 4 o'clock in the morning till whatever it was, 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to do stuff for me. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to do any work. Nobody can derail my morning. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to read. I'm going to do mobility and fitness. I'm going to go for walks. I'm going to have meat. I'm going to drink coffee because it's my favorite thing. I'm just going to have me time. And I'm so glad I did that. So glad I did that, because that was my coping mechanism. That was like my happy place. So then I was able to get some perspective on the day, and nobody could derail my day.
A lot of people can take something very practical away from that, because it was just about, you found a time that you could carve out that allowed you to focus and get away from the noise for a little bit, which I'm sure also brought you some degree of perspective in dealing with some of those challenges that you mentioned, one of which was imposter syndrome. It's something that I think everybody feels, particularly in a professional environment. You're always thrown into situations where you don't necessarily know what you're doing. You're worried you're going to be discovered as being this fraud. How did you cope with that? And maybe even just generally speaking, how would you advise that other people deal with those feelings of, I'm an imposter, self-doubt, the things that we all grapple with?
I would say, first and foremost, I feel, for me anyway, there's always a little bit of that there, and I think to a certain extent, if for me, that shows that you're pushing your boundaries. One of the things that I really believe in strongly is that you have to push your boundaries and push your limits. I think if you've been to my website, you'll see I've got the T.S. Eliot quote on there. If you're not in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? And I love that, because I think it speaks volume. Is one of the things I say to my kids, like, go find how tall you are. If you're not in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? It's such a powerful expression. And I think if you're not pushing your boundaries, then you probably won't feel imposter syndrome, because you're the very definition of safe, comfortable, not challenging yourself. You're where you feel you belong. And so I think it's important for people, at least it is for me anyway, to realize that I don't think it'll ever go away. Like, I have a bit of imposter syndrome now. I'm doing a podcast. Right? I launched a podcast. I'd never done a podcast before. I'd never done any kind of media like this before. And I'm coming up on 1 year in, and I'm starting to realize that I can hold my own in this space. And I've got a podcast that people want to listen to, and thousands of people are downloading it. And I'm starting to believe that I can call myself a podcaster now. But at first I had imposter syndrome. So I think there's an element of getting comfortable with it, getting comfortable with imposter syndrome as it's just an emotion. It's just something that your mind is telling you to try and keep you safe. It doesn't want you making a fool of yourself by doing something that everybody's going to laugh at. It's like a survival instinct. So that's one thing, is like, get comfortable with it. That's all it is, just an emotion. You can get through it. And on the other side is huge value and greatness and learning. And then the other thing is, over my career, I always looked up to certain companies, and I always thought, I bet people who work there are the smartest people in the world. So smart. They've got to be, I get a meeting, and I won't name any brands because I don't want to be disrespectful, but I get a meeting with this amazing brand that is mainstream, that every consumer around the world knows. And I think, these guys are going to rock my world. In the next hour, I'm going to learn some stuff from these people. And you get into the meeting, they're just normal people. They're just like the people you work with. They're just like you. They're just, trying to do a job. And so I think that recognizing that the people above you are just normal people, the people in these other companies that you hold in such high regard, they're just normal people. They're struggling with all the same things that you are. And so probably a combination of those two things. And specifically to your question, as a CEO, there were definitely times when I felt out of my depth, but only because I had defined in my mind leadership as, I needed to have the best handle on the P&L. I needed to understand the mechanics of the business better than anybody else. And it, notionally, that's just completely inaccurate. That's like saying, if I was a submarine commander, I need to know how to control everything on the submarine better than anybody else. And that's just ridiculous. You've got specialists to do all of those things. And so I started to view my role is is supporting people, is creating a positive culture where we focus on the things we can do. We don't dwell too much on the things we can't do. When I took that role, I knew for sure that 50% of the time and resources in the business were being spent moaning about the business. And if I could just unlock half of that 50%, we were going to win. Right. That's what I got focused on, is like, can I stop all of that negativity or some of that negativity from happening in the business? And when I realized that, the imposter syndrome did start to go away, because I realized that I was just as qualified to do that as anybody.
That makes total sense. And it's situational. So you stepped into that situation, which called for a certain set of actions and even a certain leader potentially, versus another situation might be totally different and it might call for different things. And I think you recognized that and adapted. When you were in that situation, we were thrown into the fire. You must have been learning at an insane rate in terms of both about yourself as well as how to run a business, what it's actually like in that type of role. Now you've have that experience in your background, and you're setting out in some other paths, both professionally as well as things that are maybe more hobbies or other areas of interest. What have you taken from that experience? Are there things that are causing you to think about 28 Summers and how you go about that differently than potentially you would have had you not had that experience as a CEO?
Yeah, that's a great question. For sure, I think that it was a steep learning curve. For sure, you're right, and I learned so much there, and I think that experience, has made me a better person. And I'm not sitting here before you suggesting that I've got it all figured out. Like, I'm full of flaws. Just get my wife on, or but I'm working on them. And I think that what that period in my life taught me absolutely was, do not sweat the small stuff, because you can't control it. And it's in a way, it's bizarre that it took me 41 years to figure that out, but it did. So that was a big learning, and that's definitely valuable now. I mean, old Jason, old Jason, that's one of the things that I should talk about with you, is that partly coming out of this was being true to yourself. And so, all my career, I introduced myself as Jason Worthy. That was like this corporate persona that I put out there. Never showed my tattoos, never showed the real me. My mom and my dad and my friends when I was younger called me Jay. And I was always Jason at work and Jay privately. And so part of me, saying, hey, I'm Jay Worthy now, is me saying, this is me for my, warts and all, this is me. And that process of becoming CEO taught me that just be yourself. You don't have to put on a face for anybody. So absolutely, as I go into this, is authenticity and honesty, and just being me is really important. And that's something that I encourage people that I'm talking to and working with to do as well.
I know some people feel like they can't be themselves in their professional role for whatever reason, like they're too weird, they're too this, or just in general, it could even be the culture just doesn't necessarily allow for the degree of expression that they might otherwise have. Is that something that you've bumped up against, or do you think it's really always just a self-imposed type of situation? And how do you grapple with it if there is some type of external pressure to conform? What would you do in that situation, or what would you potentially advise somebody else to do if they find themselves in that type of situation?
It's difficult, isn't it, Mike? Because I don't know that if I had have taken my own advice 10 years ago, whether I would have been able to sit here now and tell you the story I just told you. Because I think if I had been more of myself, I might not have got those opportunities. And that's a sad admission, really, but it's also, but I also think it's true. So much so that I repressed and subdued all of that stuff because I felt, for whatever reason, like it wasn't what was considered acceptable, of a leader. So it's really difficult. I think if I could give myself advice again, I probably would just say, be you, be open and be you, and be honest. And know that unfortunately some people may not be supportive or understanding of that, because unfortunately what happens is when you put on a face, you're stuck there then. And so I actually had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, oh, hey, what's the J thing? Like, I've only ever known you as Jason. I'm like, well, go speak to my mom and dad. They call me Jay. My best friends at school called me Jay. And then the other thing that is packed into that as well is I wanted to really reconnect. When I came back from the US, I was grappling with some depression and anxiety, and I wasn't in a particularly great place. And I decided to get outside more. And I started trail running again in the woods and in the forest. And in doing so, I started to create a bit of space to think. And I remembered, it was like it kind of rose to the surface because I created space and I had opportunity, just how much I loved being outside. And I wanted to do, I'd done all of this stuff as a child. And when it all came flooding back, the happiness came back. I started to feel more content. I started to figure out what I really wanted to focus on and what made me happy. And that mask that I put on all those years ago had repressed all of that. So it wasn't a good thing.
With respect to that period of dark spot for a little while for you, depression, anxiety, what was, if you're comfortable talking about it, what was at the root of that? Was it in a feeling like you couldn't be your authentic self, or were there other dynamics at play with why you felt that way?
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it at all, because I think we don't talk about this stuff enough, because perhaps our egos don't let us, or we don't want to show vulnerability. But those things I think are really important. Actually, one of the leadership qualities I think is probably most important is vulnerability, is the ability to show that you're not this perfect person. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on. I had guilt. I had an amazing wife, beautiful kids, great house, financially very secure. I've been privileged and fortunate enough to have a great executive career. I mean, all the things people would kill to be in that position, right? And there was me, unhappy, and but I always like to say that depression doesn't really care how much money you have, or it doesn't really care, how your relationship is, or it doesn't care about any of that stuff. It's completely kind of aselective. If it's going to get you, it's going to get you, and there's no rhyme or reason. But I had tremendous guilt, so I felt like there are loads of people worse off than me in the world. And how can I have the audacity to feel this way when I'm so fortunate? Which is a really destructive circle to be in. It's a really bad place to be, because there's no getting out of that. There's no good answer if you allow yourself to think that way. So I had to learn to be kind to myself, which was really important. The other stuff that was going on was a little bit of ego, Mike, which it doesn't feel great to say, but it's important to say. I'd been in this rocket fuel career. I got myself to CEO, and then I left, and everybody just kept on going. The whole world just kept on spinning, and this industry that I'd given 2 decades to didn't really care generally. I mean, some people that I really care about reached out to me, and I got some really amazing messages, and I've stayed in touch with some people that are really important to me in my life. But for the most part, the industry just moved on, and so it should. I mean, there's no reason that it should have stopped, but your ego doesn't think that way. It's just like, oh my God, it just instantly, I went from this to this. So that's something to grapple with. And then I think the other thing that I grappled with was kind of linked to that, was a lack of identity. I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. And because of the way that I'd approached my career, I'd always been quite thoughtful about what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, and the opportunities I would take and the paths that I would take. And all of a sudden I found myself not at a crossroads, which is where I'd often been in my life, where opportunities presented themselves and I could go left or I could go right, I found myself in a, without sounding too cliched, in a metaphorical field. And there were no signposts, there were no hedges, there were no trees, there was nothing to navigate from. I didn't know where to go. And I genuinely was lost. I was completely lost. And in that moment, I got really stuck. And I remember countless conversations with my parents, with my wife, with my best friends. I just didn't know what I wanted to do next. And it was a really hard time. I'm not trying to get the old violin out. I appreciate that, relatively speaking, for many people, they've had more adversity than that. But for me, it was a really tough time, and I did not know what I needed to do next, and I felt completely out of control.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you were willing to go there. And it's funny because even at the end there, I feel like there was the instinct to apologize for, hey, I've got it good relatively. So not allowing ourselves to have those kinds of feelings. And the truth of the matter is, I think that that's incredibly common. I think both aspects of it are really common, and people don't sometimes recognize how common it might be. Both the fact that, hey, I actually have a great life and yet I still feel this way. What's wrong with me is essentially the story we start telling ourselves. And then it can become that spiral like you talked about. And then
Mhm.
just, I think, being stuck, not
Yeah.
knowing what's next, not having clarity, especially if you're somebody who historically has been somebody who knows what's next and is fairly guided and thoughtful about where life is going. When you hit those points where you just don't know, that is tough. It's
Yeah.
tough stuff. And there isn't a roadmap for necessarily how to get out of it. There's things you can do that can be helpful, but there is also some kind of process that you have to go through that has to happen on its own time. That it sounds like for you, getting back out in nature, doing the trail running, those were almost like creating that space for you to take that time for yourself to allow that stuff to bubble up.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, Mike, for anybody listening who that story does resonate with, two things. One is, to your point, it's completely okay and normal to have a great life and be deeply unfulfilled. That's actually normal. Sadly, it happens a lot, and that's the bit that people get stuck in, like I did, because they feel tremendous guilt about that, because they have this great life externally, but they feel unfulfilled. And it doesn't mean you don't love your partner, it doesn't mean you don't love your kids. It just means that you're in the wrong place, and we have such a short time on this earth that you've got to get in the right place. And I believe that strongly. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is, when you find whatever it is that helps you start to climb out of the difficult spot, like I did, it was kind of being outdoors, trail running. The first bit's really hard, because when you get alone and you've only got and again, you've talked about this on your podcast before, and you've blogged about it, but when it's just you and your voice in your head, at first it's really uncomfortable. It's not a great conversation, or at least it
Mhm.
wasn't for me. But eventually I just kind of work through it. And I actually now genuinely think I do my best thinking when I'm running. No headphones, just out running. And that's because I'm in flow. I'm happy. I've got space to think, and all the noise dissipates, and I can just think about the stuff that I want to think about.
Yeah, I think getting outdoors, even if it's just for a walk, is so beneficial. There's
Mhm.
something about that space. And I had never heard anybody talk about what you mentioned earlier, but I just want to bring that back up around getting height, because I've had that experience. Until you articulate it that way, you're totally right. It's all of a sudden you start to see the vastness of the world, and it puts into perspective the things that you might be feeling might not be as large as they were feeling prior to getting into that situation.
For sure.
I know we've only got a few minutes left. I wanted to just ask you one last question, because something that I think I've learned from you, where you're taking things in terms of executive coaching, adventure, resilience is something that I think we all could use more of in life. And certainly in leadership role, you described it really well. I mean, you were probably more so than a lot of leaders really thrown into the fire in a very difficult situation, didn't have time to prepare mentally for it. And so there was an aspect of that that challenged you. And resilience, I think, is sometimes the only thing that we have to
Mm.
fall back on. And I think a lot of what you have taught me and what you're about and what you're building with your community is around using those approaches for resilience. And I wanted to hear you maybe speak a little bit more about what that means to you, what resilience means to you, and how people can do some of the approaches that you advise in order to build their own resilience in life.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big one, right? And I'd love to chat to you more about that another time. But I think at a high level, I think resilience is one of those leadership qualities that probably goes unnoticed a lot of the time, and often because I think, frankly, we don't give leaders enough opportunity to show resilience because they start to underperform and then we whack them.
Mm.
And you see this in professional sport, that in the most concentrated way, a team is winning, 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 winning. The moment they lose, the coach is gone, right? And I think that we don't get a chance to see resilience, and resilience is hitting adversity, finding a way to keep moving and to keep going through the mire and come out the other side with a whole ton of growth and learning under your belt around what works and what doesn't work. And so, I say I like to do kind of ultra endurance events, and I'm not a gifted athlete. I'm never the fastest or the strongest, but I like to say, all it takes is just one foot in front of the other, right? You could go out and run 100 miles tomorrow. It might take you a week, right? And you might have to rest a lot in between, but you could do it. You've got all of the raw ingredients you need. You got, 2 feet, 2 legs. You got willpower. You got access to food and water. You could do it. So we build. Resilience is one of those things that I think we often perceive as being something people have or they don't have, but I believe it's a muscle or capability that we can build. But equally, a bit like anything in life, if we don't use it, we lose it. So if you're not constantly and consistently putting yourself in a situation where you have to demonstrate resilience and where you have to kind of face some adversity, then I think we get a little bit soft. I'm not saying everybody has to go and climb a mountain or row an ocean or trek a jungle every month, but let's continually find ways to put ourselves in new situations. For you or me, that could be, learn to paint. It could be learning a new language. It doesn't have to be physical challenges, but consistently putting ourselves in a position where we have to stretch our comfort zone and we have to get outside of our comfort zone and start to feel that imposter syndrome and start to feel like we don't belong. That teaches you something. And so I think for leaders, that would be one of the biggest things that I would encourage them to do, is find ways to challenge yourself. And I believe, bit of a personal pitch, I guess, for my pod and the things that I'm building, I believe that adventure is the perfect vehicle to do that. Really the perfect vehicle to do that. Is just get out there, start taking on challenges that scare you. I like to sign up for at least one challenge a year that scares the hell out of me. That in my quiet moments where I'm away from other people, if I'm honest with myself, I don't know whether I can do it. That is an invigorating process to go through. And even if you fall short, you learn.
That's amazing. Well, I'm so appreciative that you are doing what you're doing, that you're putting out your gifts to the world in the way that you're doing it. I think everybody should follow your stuff. Where's the best place for people to find what you're up to? Where do you want to direct them?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at One Day Adventurer, the number one. But you can also find everything to do with the pod, my blog, some of the stuff I'm starting to do with coaching at 28summers.com.
Well, it's been so good to be with you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I just want to echo podcast is amazing and inspiring. The guests you have, the things that you're building, the community around that, and just the message it's been really inspiring for me personally. It's been something that I've taken a lot from. And so I think there's a ton more people who could benefit from it. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you again for being here with me and taking the time to have this conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Mike. It's been amazing. It's been a real honor to spend time with you. I always take something away from our conversations. This has been a lot of fun.